If you've been around Android development for any amount of time, you have probably heard of this thing called a constraint layout. And there's a number of different types of layouts in Android. You got linear layouts, relative layouts, frame layouts, like I said, constraint layouts, coordinator layouts, all kinds of different layouts. But this video in particular, I'm going to be talking about constraint layout because it's one of the, actually, I think it is the newest one. I can't remember exactly when it came out, but pretty recently in the last couple of years. And it's supposed to solve all kinds of problems, which it does, in fact, solve a lot of problems. And I'm going to be showing you kind of a beginner, the most basic sort of beginner example, showing you a way that you can use constraint layouts to build something called responsive layouts. So if you have different screen sizes, how can you use constraint layouts? How can you leverage constraint layouts to account for the different screen sizes and also rotations? You know, like if you rotate your screen, kind of messed up stuff kind of happens sometimes. So how can you use constraint layouts to improve that look? So once again, the point of this video is to kind of get your feet wet, just get an introduction to constraint layouts and one very common example of how to use them. So on the screen here, I have an example. I got a phone and I have an app running on this phone. This is for an app that I'm building, this layout. And there's some very basic components. You got like a toolbar, you have some basic text view with a label on top. Again, label, it's basic text view. A link that takes you to another screen, although we're not going to be talking about that. Just kind of pay attention to what the layout looks like. And then a little logo button down here, which will actually log me out of the app, but it's just kind of for show for this video. You don't need to know anything about this app, just focus on what the layout looks like. So a very common problem that people encounter when they build layouts is it looks good now, looks fine, you know, everything's oriented correctly, but what happens if this gets run on a smaller device or if I was to rotate the screen? So let's take a look here. If I rotate the screen, you get all kinds of weird stuff happening. You get kind of this little squishing, you know, these are kind of too close together. And this is a very simple use case. Like a lot worse things could happen. Like I'm sure you have apps where you've built layouts and rotated it and it just looked destroyed, demolished. So this is one very common thing. And like I said, if you were testing on a large device with a larger screen and then you ran it on a smaller device, those kind of things can happen. Your layouts can squish or just get weird. So how can we use constraint layouts? How can we use a constraint layout to improve this? And that's what I'm going to be focusing on in this video. So let's take a look at the code. I'm going to show you what this looks like right away, the code, what it looks like without using a constraint layout, without using a constraint layout properly. And then we're going to take a look at how to use a constraint layout in a very basic way that's going to very easily improve the way that this layout looks. So here's the layout in its current state. It is a constraint layout, but it's not used correctly. So right now I have this kind of text input layout that's at the top here with a text view inside of it. The constraints on it are all relative to the parent. So it's constrained to the top of the parent, to the right of the parent, to the left of the parent, and to the bottom of the parent. Then it has a vertical bias, which places it on the layout where it is. So like I could change this to 0.10 and it would kind of move it up, but 0.20 is 20% of the width or of the height of the layout, which places it where it is. And then if you scroll down, the next one is the same way. So it's all constrained to the parent with a vertical bias of 33. So it's just slightly lower down. Next one is a text view, exactly the same, all constrained to the parent with a slightly lower bias. And then the last thing is the same with another lower bias with 95. So this is one way you could use a constraint layout, but as you saw in the demo when I showed you, you don't probably want to do that because if you rotate the screen or the screen size changes for some reason, you can get this kind of weird squishing behavior. And this is common with other layouts too, with relative layouts, with linear layouts. It might not be the same, but you still could get kind of some weird squishing behavior. So the focus of this video is to show you how to avoid that weird squishing behavior using a constraint layout. Also, just as kind of an FYI for you as a resource, the section of the Android documentation that talks about constraint layout in the training section, so developer, android.com, training, constraint layout, index.html. This is actually a really great, I guess you could call it an article talking about constraint layouts and the different ways that you can use them. I highly recommend checking this out after this video or before if you want to, but I'm going to be showing you everything you need in this video. But definitely afterwards, like this is going to be a simple example. And if you want to know more, this is a really great article. They do a really great job of showing you the different things you can do with images. It's a really good article. I definitely recommend checking that out. So now let's take a look at how we can fix this layout. Okay, so what is the first thing that we want to do? Well, if we take a look at our layout here, imagine this had more inputs in it. Like imagine there was 10 inputs instead of 2. This layout could be really, really big, and you might actually have to scroll. If you don't have a scroll view as your parent view, that would become a problem. And especially if you had, 10 inputs and then you rotated the screen, obviously that would become a problem. I wouldn't be able to see all the inputs. Everything would be cut off. So that's kind of the first thing I would say is if in general, you should almost always use a scroll view as your parent. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to change this to a scroll view. That way, if for some reason it goes bigger than the screen size, then you know you're covered. And if we're going to add a scroll view as a parent, then we need to add a constraint layout. So I'm going to say match parent and match parent for that. And I don't know why this has changed recently, but when you add a new layout, it kind of does this weird spacing thing. And if I go to the next line, it takes me all the way over there. But if I do it again, then it lines up. I don't know what's going on with that, but anyway. And actually, this is going to be wrap content. So now take everything that we had before that was inside the original constraint layout. So now I have a scroll view, which is the parent. I have a constraint layout. And inside of this, I didn't close it off, constraint layout. And inside, actually, I think what I did was I cut the other side of it. So anyway, paste that in. No, I didn't. Oh, no. I need to, I thought I did cut it out, but I didn't. So anyway, take everything, put it inside the constraint layout, and there we go. So it should look weird right now, but so right now all you have is a scroll view, and then inside there you have a constraint layout, and you have all that stuff that we had before. And if you want the code for this, there'll be a link in the description. So now what do we want to do? Well, inside of these layouts, basically what we want to do is we want to orient them relative to one another with constraints in between. So when you start at the first one, you want to first add the constraints for that. So in this case, you want to constrain it to the top of the parent. Yes, you want to constrain it to the right of the parent, to the left of the parent. But then the bottom, you want to actually constrain to whatever is going to be below it. So in this case, it's not going to be the parent. It's going to be this layout that sits below it. So I have to give this an ID because right now it doesn't have an ID. I'm going to give it a username layout ID, and I also have to give this one an ID, so it'll be email layout. And now I want to change this constraint, so I'm going to say constraint bottom to the top of the thing that's below it. So that's going to be username layout. So the bottom constraint on this layout is constrained to the top of the one that's below it, which is this one right here. So you can see kind of the arrows here. If you click here, you can see that's constrained to the top, and then it's constrained to the top of the thing that is below it. So now let's go down to the next one. So this next layout, currently you can see from the picture over here, it's constrained to the top of the parent and the bottom of the parent. But what we want to do is constrain it to the top of the thing that's above it and the top of the thing that is below it. So if I go right here, it says constraint top. So I'm going to change this constraint top to the bottom of whatever is above it, and that's going to be email layout. So now the top constraint of this layout is constrained to the bottom of what's above it, which is this layout up here. And then we want to change the bottom constraint, so constraint bottom, and I want to constrain the bottom of this one to whatever is below it. In that case, that's going to be this text view right here. So I want to change this to this ID to change password. So there we go. And I also want to actually delete these vertical biases. We don't need these anymore. So I'm pressing Control Y to get rid of those, which just removes the line. We have no need for any of these vertical biases anymore. So I'm deleting those. Now let's move on to the next text view, which is this one right here. And I want to change these constraints. So once again, the same kind of thing. I'm doing constraint top. I'm constraining the top of it to the layout that's above it. So the bottom of the layout that's above it, and then I want to constrain the bottom to the thing that's below it. So constrain bottom to the top of whatever is below it. In this case, that's going to be this logout button. And the last one is the logout button. So constraint top to the bottom of the thing above it. So constraint top to change password, and then I want to change the constraint bottom. Actually, that's still going to be constrained to the parent. So let's just kind of review what's happened here. So the top layout is constrained to the top of the parent, but the bottom of it is constrained to the top of the thing above it. So this layer right here is constrained to the top of the layout below it, which is this one right here. And then you have the same kind of thing going down the line. So now this layout, the top of it is constrained to the bottom of the thing above it. The bottom constraint is constrained to the top of the thing below it, which is this password field, and the same thing repeats until you get to the bottom, where the only thing is different is the bottom constraint, which is then going to be the parent. So that is how you orient things relative to one another using a constraint layout. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, wow, that's really cool. That's going to help me a lot. And in fact, if we ran the app right now, everything would definitely perform properly. So maybe I'll just run that. But some of you might be watching, you might be thinking, well, Mitch, I already knew how to do that. That's kind of the most basic thing possible you could do with a constraint layout. Can you show me something better? And my answer is yes, I can show you something better. I'm going to show you a couple of things that you're most likely going to be encountering when you're building layouts, and constraint layouts have a very simple way of solving these problems. My build is taking a long time. I'm not sure why. Okay, so here we have the app running. I'm going to go to that account screen. Notice everything is, it's not really better. At this point, it looks the same, but if I was to rotate it, everything gets oriented correctly. And if there was more fields, I would also have a scrolling behavior in here. So we could actually, to imitate what that would look like, I could put like a big margin here. I could do margin top like 50 or even 100 dp. Let's do more. Let's do 200 dp. That's going to bring it down. So now if I was to rotate it in that form, it would definitely not all fit on the screen. So you'd have to have a scroll view, which is why I added the scroll view to the top. So hopefully this build takes less time than the first one. So there we have the app starting up. It's struggling because I rotated it. Let's go to the screen. So there we have that big margin there. So it looks stupid, but let's see if I rotate it. Then here you have this scrolling behavior. And this is what you want, because if you had a whole bunch of fields, that would be an issue. If you would need a scroll view in here to be able to hold all of the fields, or the user be able to look at all the fields. So now I want to move on and talk about something that I think is really cool about constraint layouts, because at this point, some of you might not be very impressed. So let's delete this margin and let's move on. So let's go to the documentation, because I think it's always a good idea to take a look at the docs, because that way you can find this as a reference on your own. So here's the same link I referenced at the beginning of the video. And I want to scroll down and look for this selection here. It says control linear groups with a chain, because a very common thing that people encounter when they're designing their layouts, when they're building their layouts, is sure, a constraint layout can orient things relative to one another, and that looks fine, it looks better. But how do you, if you had a grouping of text views and you wanted, this grouping to be stacked close together, but you wanted another one to be more separated, how do you easily do that without just throwing margins everywhere and making things really confusing? Well, with constraint layouts, they have this thing called chains. So you can control linear groups with something called a chain. And there's different options here. So you can spread, say these were text views, you could distribute the space evenly. So A, B, and C, if they were text views, they would be spread evenly across the layout. Option 2 here would be the two edges. So they hug the edges, and then they have like the most space possible. I guess that would be the best way to put it. The space in between them is the most space possible, which is spread. That makes sense. Weighted, you can give different weights to different layouts. So maybe you want this one to occupy 40%, this one to occupy 40%, this one to occupy the last 20%. Very easy to do. And then the last one is packed. So if you want to have a group packed together, kind of separate from the others, and the others off doing whatever they want, then you could do that. So this is a really kind of powerful property of constraint layout. So I really highly suggest checking this out, and I'm going to experiment with this and show you how to use it. So the first thing you need to know about these chains is this paragraph right here. It outlines the most important thing. The chain's head view, the leftmost view in the horizontal chain or the topmost view in the vertical chain, defines kind of the properties. That's where you want to define the properties for the chain. So if you're as it said there, if you were looking at our view, in this particular view, this would be the top of the chain. This layout right here. Let's take a look at Android Studio. So if we scroll to the top, we have our constraint layout. This would be the chain head, the layout, the first one that comes to the chain. So this is where you want to specify your chain properties. So I can just write chain, and obviously I want to do a vertical chain because our layout is oriented vertically. And I have a bunch of properties that I can choose. So I have packed, spread, and spread inside. So if I choose packed, nothing changes. Everything is already packed together. That's exactly how it is. Or I can choose spread, and everything will spread out. I thought that it would do that, but probably because I have to do match parent. And that's because I forgot something. So I need to come up to the scroll view and I need to write fill viewport and set that to true. And that's going to allow us to use the entire view with the constraint layout. So now if I come down and change this chain style, right now it's at spread. So it's evenly distributing the space amongst all of the views inside of the constraint layout. I can change this to the other one. So spread inside, which maximizes the distance between each view. And then of course packed, which is kind of almost like the default behavior. So you have everything kind of packed right into the center. So obviously with this example, it's pretty obvious that you don't want to spread these out. That would look pretty silly with spread or spread inside. But now spread doesn't look too bad, but still you probably don't want to use that. You're likely going to want to use packed or use nothing at all, which is the default behavior is actually evenly distributed. So what we're going to do is we are going to change it to packed, and I'm going to kind of hug this parent view up to the top to get it closer to the top of the screen. So I'm going to come over to the head of the chain, which is this text input layout, and I'm going to give it a vertical bias, so constraint vertical bias of 0.1. And you can see that brings the entire chain up. I could do 0.2, 0.5. It just brings it further and further down the screen. So 0.1, that's going to bring it right up close to the top of the screen. And then just to improve this a little bit, we could add some margins in between if you wanted to. So I could come kind of below this text input layout and I could add a little margin here. Maybe just like margin top of 5 dp or maybe 10 dp, just to kind of spread it out just a little bit, and copy that and maybe go down to the bottom, the next one, give it a little margin. And then here for this one, I actually want to give this a bigger margin. So actually I'm going to give it a margin left of 15 dp. I'm going to give it a margin right of 15 dp just to bring it away from the edges. Margin bottom is going to be 30 dp, and margin top will be 50 dp to really pull that away. And this is got to have dp here because I want the logo button to be a little further from everything else, because if I'm pressing change password, I don't want to accidentally hit logout. You can even bring this farther away, go like 70 dp or something like that to really pull it away. So that's all I wanted to talk about for this kind of basic constraint layout video to give you an introduction. But I encourage you to check out the documentation. Like I said, there's some really great examples here. We already went through the chain, but you can check out the weight stuff. So how to give different weights to different views or different components in the view. Like if I wanted to give this a larger weight, I could do constraint vertical weight, give us a weight of like 20. Of course, I already have all of this set up, so it's not going to affect my view. But if I didn't have any of the other properties set, I could give this like a weight of 20. I could give this like a weight of 30, and it would all be relative to everything else in the view. So some pretty cool stuff you can do with constraint layout. And just to finish off, let's just run this to make sure that it doesn't screw things up and look funny. And you come to me and you leave a comment. You say, Mitch, I did what you told me, but it screwed up my app. So just to kind of make sure that everything's working correctly. So here's the app running. Let's go to the account screen. There you can see everything looks pretty good. Now let's rotate it and everything should adjust and we get that scrolling behavior. So everything is spread out evenly and it can scroll and there's no big deal. Everything looks good. So hopefully that was helpful for your introduction to constraint layouts. If you liked this video on constraint layouts, I don't usually do a lot of videos on layouts. I'm not a big material design guy. I don't really like to do material design. But if you like this video, leave a like and a comment and let me know, because that way I know that people want to see this stuff. Because if enough people want something, I inevitably will make it. So either right now it's kind of Kotlin coroutines and maybe some constraint layout stuff. So leave a comment, leave a like if it was helpful, and I will see you in that next video. Actually, before I go, I forgot to mention, I have a really cool app that's coming up. I've been building it for the last couple months, which is this one on my website. If you go to codingwithmitch.com, it's called Powerful Android Apps with Jetpack Architecture. So we're going to be using Kotlin, MVVM architecture. We actually might be using MVI architecture, which is very similar to MVVM, but a little bit, might be a little bit better. I'm still kind of exploring that. Live data and view models, navigation components, which is the new way to navigate with fragments, room persistence library, coroutines, bringing my other hand over here, I'm running out of space, retrofit 2, Dagger 2, REST API integration on a real server that I built. So this is kind of an all-encompassing course. It's going to be a really good one. If you're curious, the server that I'm talking about is openapi.xyz. I built this just in specifically for this app that I'm building. It's a blogging website where you can log in, create an account, and create blogs. So like this would be a blog entry. It has an image, a title, a description, and basically the app that I'm building is going to interact with this website. So you'll be able to register from the app, change account properties, post blogs. All of this is going to be interacting through the REST API. If you're curious about how the REST API works, go to the API section here, and it talks about the URL endpoints and all that kind of stuff. So just wanted to give you a heads up of what's coming. And if you're more of a beginner, because that is definitely not a beginner course, I have a Android learning path on my website just for you guys who are beginners. Check out this course, the Room Persistence Library, SQLite for Beginners. That is going to show you how to get started with Android and start using the best practice methods to do things like using the Room Persistence Library with SQLite. So that is now it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.